Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed for part 2 of the July 2025 Q&A series.
Got the year right. Good job.
Nice.
We've been far enough into 2025 that you no longer say 2024 anymore.
I'm confident that when I say the year, I'll get it right the first time, which is always nice. Anyway, more questions in this episode. Part 1's also available, but check that out after you watch this one. And yeah, let's get into some questions. But before we do,
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new Duranaut high-performance thermal paste. Duranaut offers extreme long-term stability combined with outstanding thermal conductivity, and this has been achieved through a specially engineered silicon oil combined with aluminium microparticles and zinc oxide nanoparticles of various shapes. Duranaut isn't electrically conductive and won't harden over time. For best performance, you'll want to apply a very thin layer, and to help with this, included is the TG Spatula Pro. The spatula's revised design allows for increased pressure during application, making it easy to spread a thin, even layer of Duranaut. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. I know a lot of people are disappointed with the RTX 5070. How low of a price would the 5070 have to go before it becomes a complete no-brainer to buy within its performance limitations? I think a complete no-brainer, like $450. I think a more appropriate price given the limitations, which I assume you're talking about the 12GB VRAM buffer, which less of a limitation right now, though there are examples, but will probably become very problematic within the lifetime of the product given its performance level. Yeah, $50. So it's almost 20% faster than RTX 4070 with the same amount of VRAM. It has a $50 lower MSRP, but it retails for $580. So there's obviously enough demand there to push it above the MSRP. So despite how disappointed people are, it's not like they can't ship them based on that. I know initial sales weren't particularly impressive, and they did sit around a bit, but they're clearly selling at a rate that justifies them selling for above MSRP in the cheapest instances. So yeah, look, I'm less concerned with the price because I think the performance uplift relative to the 4070 was quite impressive. I just think it needed to be a 16GB card. So yeah, but look, if it was $500, it would be much more attractive and compete really well with the RX 9070. But for a no-brainer, you're like, if it was $450 and you could actually buy it for $450, it'd probably be the only GPU you'd buy. It'd be pretty good. So depends how you want that question answered. But that would be my no-brainer price.
yeah, I think that sounds about right to me, especially because if it was, say, $450 at launch, then the comparisons would have been more to like your 4060 Ti from the previous generation. And that would have been like massively faster in the charts.
We've argued is what it should be.
Yeah, I mean, the 4060 Ti was a poorly priced product. Obviously, it had the 16 and 8GB differences, both of which were poorly priced to begin with. And then the 16GB model settled down towards $450. But yeah, I mean, that would have been obviously an incredible price. I think most people would have been happy with $500. I think $550, it's kind of like, yeah, it was cheaper than the old model, but what you were getting as a package, it was like, yeah. But $500, I think as well, a lot of people always consider the whole 70 class thing. Like, what is a 70 class GPU and where should that be in the lineup? And so I think considering that has been around $500 since the 20 series, people would have been much more receptive to that sort of price. But at $550, it's kind of like, it's cheaper than the previous model, but we've had, as recently as the 30 series, the 3070 was $500. So that would have kept the whole class thing a bit more appropriate, they would have got a better reception out of the gate with that one, I think. So $450, flying off shelves, excellent. Everyone raving about it. $500, certainly more appropriate for that product. So it's a little overpriced, but certainly at the $580 that it's actually selling for, it's not amazing. Luckily, in a lot of other territories, you are getting it for more like the MSRP, or at least the US MSRP. I know in Europe it's often below their local MSRP, which puts it closer to sort of where $550 converted price is, which is a bit better for those regions. But yeah, in the US, obviously demand's different, tariff situation's different, so it's pushing that up a little bit. So yeah.
All right, Tim, I've got a few notes here because the question is, and this is from our Discord, what was the last 50 class card that aged well?
So, tough one.
Yeah, we're going to have to sort of use that one loosely, that term, I think. But it won't be the 50-50.
No. So let's rule that one out.
Won't be the 50-50. There was no 40-50. I think we'll all agree that the 30-50 was utter trash.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
awful. Yeah.
Yeah.
No good.
Yep. There was no 250, but there was a 1650. But the 1650 was also utter trash. That was then replaced by the 6050 Super, which was okay. Like it was okay because the 1650 was so bad. So it was a nice upgrade over that. Did have only 4 gigabytes of VRAM, which was probably somewhat appropriate at the time, though I'm not sure how well it aged due to that. It wouldn't jump out at me as like the 1650 Super was a card we recommended for a long period of time, and it was, it was kind of, once the generation ended, we didn't really talk about it again. It wasn't a great product in that sense.
It suffered from that, and while it wasn't an issue at the time, if we're talking about like aging well, it didn't have features like DLSS, which the 2060 did have.
Yes.
So that also kind of hurt its aging sense of things, because 5 years after that product launched that would have launched in what, like 2018 or 2019 from memory. 5 years later, you're well into DLSS being good.
Yes.
So it would have suffered from that.
Yep, definitely. So yeah, if it had DLSS support, that would have helped it age a lot better, but unfortunately didn't. So the 3050 was the first 50 series GPU to get DLSS support, and then you got the 5050, which obviously continues that, and DLSS 4 and all that. So not a good lineup so far. If we go back to the GTX 950, that was at the time considered to be a fairly solid. I think it was a mid-range GPU, despite the fact that it would be very much entry level in today's sort of lineup. There was a 2015 release, $160 US, considered to be like 1080p gaming card with 2 gigabytes of VRAM. But like it was okay. I don't think it aged well though. Again, only 2 gigabytes of VRAM.
What about the 1050? That was in there as well from Pascal.
I skipped the 1050 series because I don't think, like maybe I think the 1050 and the 1050 Ti were pretty underwhelming upon release relative to the other cards.
Well, I think the main issue there was that the 1060 had 6 gigabytes of VRAM that a lot of people had. But then if you went to the 1050, there was, I think, a 2 and a 3 gig model. And so you're cutting down a lot of performance and...
2 and a 3. Yeah, I thought it was 4, but honestly, there was that many configurations now.
They might have had a 4 as well.
Yeah. It doesn't, again, that one doesn't stick out to me. The last card I remember being decent for what it was and sort of people recommended and used it for a long time was probably the GTX 750 Ti. GTX 750 Ti released.
Talking like a decade ago?
2014.
Okay. It's a long time ago.
A little over a decade ago. If I had to pick one, that would probably be it. I don't know if that's a terrible pick given all of them, but I think that's probably the one I would go for because I do recall that being a reasonable entry-level card for a while. But
yeah, and I think it just goes to show how different the sort of product stack is in general, because back in those eras, there was readily available GPU models at like $100, $150. That was a very common price point for your sort of bottom of the stack GPUs. Today, that price is $250. There has been inflation and stuff, but not to that extent. And there were just many more models below the 60 class, because the 60 class has always been that mainstream, that's a good tier for people to buy. It's probably less so today, but it used to be the whole, you buy like a 1060, you buy a 2060, or you buy a 960 or whatever, it lasts you a fair while. It's a good card, it's capable in that era. And then as you go lower, there's less and less capabilities, but they're still reasonable. Whereas today it's like 9060 or the 5060, not really a passable GPU, and then anything below that is even less passable. Whereas that just definitely wasn't the case in the era you're talking about in 2014. So the fact that there was like a load of reasonable lower end cards back then kind of changes the whole discussion, right?
Yeah, you had to go sub $100 US to get the cards that didn't really make sense as discrete products. And
GT710, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What do you think will happen to Intel? How bad would the CPU market be without Intel? As I recall, you always said, AMD is not your friend. Wouldn't be a good situation.
No, it'd be terrible. It'd be really, really bad. It's already sort of heading in the direction where it's not as good as it was when, AMD was struggling to sort of get Ryzen out there. There were a lot of great deals. Again, it's like, while Ryzen wasn't super competitive in terms of performance, it certainly was in terms of price and value. So that's why a lot of people gave the Ryzen CPUs a shot and found out that they're pretty good. And they ended up getting a good upgrade path and all that sort of stuff. So that's helped get AMD to where they are today. But I guess, simple answer is the market would be terrible if Intel, was to go away. I think there's basically no chance that would happen, though. I mean, anything's possible, but I think Intel's here to stay, and I don't think certain governments or whatever would let Intel fold. They're of sort of, what would you call it, national security importance and stuff like that. So there's all that other political stuff that Tim and I are unfamiliar with, but know that it exists. And then there's, how much Intel's actually worth. They're still, well entrenched in multiple different industries. Like, it's not like, their CPU retail sales have been terrible. But, they still, to my understanding, pretty dominant in laptops.
Yep.
So that's something. But there's some, we've looked roughly, again, Tim and I are not financial analysts or experts. We really don't look at this stuff too much. But I do know prior to the release of Ryzen that AMD was on struggle street for a long time, losing hundreds of millions of dollars each year. And they survived somehow long enough to pull a rabbit out of their hat. So Intel's been making countless billions of dollars for decades now.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, between 2015 and about 2021, it was quite regular for Intel to make a net profit between $10 and $20 billion per year. So that adds up over time. And yes, they've had their first annual loss in nearly 4 decades of a reported 18.8 billion. So I'm just trusting that the financial numbers, the financial analyst report is correct on this front.
Don't come to us for these numbers, but this is what it seems to be based on what we could find.
Yeah, so they cite things like shrinking revenues, restructuring costs, impairment charges, strategic setbacks. A lot of that, I imagine, would be due to things like investing in fab technology, especially in the US, where it's expensive to make fabs. They've just sacked like tens of thousands of employees. That comes with huge costs as well, because you have to pay layoffs and that sort of thing to those people. And so, they're making a loss now. But as you said, you go back to like AMD losing money, and they were losing hundreds of millions of dollars, but they were also in like no industries. Like they had no presence in laptops, servers, desktops. They were, GPUs. They had some consoles that were really, propping them up back in 2015. Their main customer would have been, Sony and Microsoft with their Xbox and PlayStation consoles. Whereas today, Intel's losing all this money, but they are still, making money from, some servers. They make money from laptops, dominant, and from pre-builts as well. And I think to some degree that does hamstrings Intel to some degree, because back when AMD was losing money, it was kind of like everything's on the table. Like, they have no market share anywhere, so they can go after pretty much anything they want to.
And they were also a much smaller company, far fewer employees, so they were
agile.
They were more appropriately sized for their position. Whereas Intel, this is why they're restructuring and downsizing, because they're not appropriately sized for their position in the markets they're involved in. They went from a juggernaut that dominated to now, like, where's Intel? What's happening? But they've still got all these facilities, all this staff, and they aren't as nearly dominant as they need to be to fuel all of that.
Yeah, and of course, Intel used to be dominant in fab technology. So they had the leading technology on the market prior to a few struggles with 10 nanometer back in the day, and now TSMC is dominant. So obviously a lot of the staff and R&D costs used to be to keep Intel at the forefront of fabs, and now they're sort of battling to get back to that position, and currently aren't in a dominant position there. So a lot of staff and a lot of investment has to go into something that isn't currently leading the market in that sense. But I think as well, a lot of the complaints that we see regarding like desktop CPUs are due to things like lack of, long-term socket support, sort of refreshes, and just like underwhelming process technology. But then AMD had not the best performance back in the Ryzen days, but they were able to do things that the community wanted, like long-term platform support with AM4, which Intel can't do to the same degree. At least my reasoning for why they haven't done it is because they still have this large OEM customer base, system integrators, PC builders, who don't want that feature, because that means that people can buy a PC and upgrade it themselves, whereas a Dell or HP, they want you going back and buying another entirely new Dell system once that system is too slow. Whereas if you're selling the system with 4 or 5 years of socket support, suddenly that customer doesn't need to rely on Dell. They could just slot in the new Intel CPU. So they're kind of stuck in this really difficult position where to win the DIY market, which gives you that community base, the enthusiast market, the word of mouth, they have to implement a feature that hurts the actual customers that they've got. So when the people that are actually buying the CPUs are telling them don't do that, and then the people that want to buy but aren't buying are saying, we need this feature that you don't do, what do you do?
Yeah, I think it's like the ARC thing we talked about. It's just short-sighted. It's all bad business practices that are coming back to bite them. And I mean, we made a video about what does Intel need to fix 8 years ago. And it was very clear to us 7-8 years ago that this was all going to be a problem for Intel. We stated it in the video. We said they needed to change all these things, or their CPU retail sales are going to struggle and start to... And man, looking back at the comments in that video is very funny, because we got people telling us we were out of our minds. Look at Intel, AMD's nowhere. AMD's never going to catch Intel in retail CPU sales, and so on and so forth. And funny to look back on all of that now, but the writing was on the wall as far as we were concerned. It seemed pretty obvious this was what was going to eventually happen, and it has happened. And so far, they're showing no signs of changing. I mean, we've got some discounted CPUs, I suppose. There's that.
Yeah, but even with laptops, for example, an area where Intel is currently dominant, they're largely dominant because of the existing infrastructure that they've built around laptops, or their brand deals and that sort of thing, and the entrenchment of the Intel name. But as it always filters down from the enthusiast down generally, as AMD starts to become more popular with gamers, for example, and you start hearing that word of mouth of, Ryzen CPUs are good, AMD at some point is going to be able to leverage that into larger CPU sales for laptops. It's only a matter of time before that brand presence helps them out. It is helping them out, my understanding, a little bit on the gaming laptop side. So the things like a Jared's Tech would cover, the high-performance gaming laptops, AMD CPUs are in a much more desirable position than they've ever been for those sort of systems, because Ryzen has built this gaming brand. They're the best gaming CPUs. Therefore, I guess a laptop must be the best as well. Don't know whether that's the case. Check Jared's Tech out for that. But over time, that pressure builds and builds and builds, and then suddenly business customers want Ryzen, so the OEM sales start to slow down. And then the laptop sales, that starts to hurt as well.
Well, it's that mind share, but it's also that Intel doesn't have the cash to essentially strong arm, manipulate, or whatever you want to call it, into... Because we've talked about it in the past. I remember 8-9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, it was a long time ago, going to Computex over in Taiwan, and I went to one of the NAS builders, and they were advertising they've got a new AMD NAS, which was kind of a big deal. It was AMD Ryzen. So it must have been around 2017, 2018. So not as far back as I thought, but still a while ago. And it was pretty exciting to see a Ryzen-based NAS, but the color of the NAS was like this crappy color. I actually can't remember the color now, but the Intel ones you got in a white or a black box, the more traditional PC case type color, and the AMD one was some weird off color. And they said, yeah, we can't do AMD in the white or the black. I'm like, excuse me, what? Why? Anyway, eventually they just told me, like, well, Intel pays us to have white and black as theirs, and then they pay us to give AMD a crappy color. So I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And they just came out and told me. So that was, a thing. And people obviously don't want to buy a NAS, or weren't buying a NAS that has a less desirable color, because some people care about the color of their NAS, whatever. But it's just one example. Like, I got, straight from the horse's mouth, that Intel was subsidizing them to make sure their competitor was put in an uglier box. So,
they're being sued for anti-competitive practices in EU and stuff, so it's not a huge stretch.
No, it's a thing they obviously do, and you can imagine that happens a lot in the laptops. But as that the money dries up, there'll be less of that going on. That just helps AMD get in there quicker.
Well, and it becomes a tech debt situation as well, where it's not just that they don't have money to do those deals, but AMD has become more dominant in desktop CPU sales because the products are better. Like they're now in a position where the 9800 XGD, for example, is the best gaming CPU. Not the best value gaming CPU or whatever. It has the best performance. It is the best product. And so eventually, that helps you build up your research and development to make more products, extend the architecture, make it better. You're in that better position to improve the actual product. And so eventually you could see how if that continues down the path as AMD builds and Intel shrinks, AMD will have more resources to actually make their laptop parts better.
And soon you'll see the Intel NASs in less desirable colours.
You have to get the pink one or whatever. Right?
And the AMD ones will be in the white and black box because, AMD sucks as much as Intel. Well, I shouldn't say that because I don't know. I haven't got evidence that they've done that, but where I'm going with this. So.
But I think a real problem with Intel and why they're in this position of losing so much money is they're still having to invest in fabs and they're not actually making a lot of their products in their own fabs. They had to switch from making Intel CPUs, especially the laptop stuff, at Intel fabs to TSMC. So they're spending money on technology and fabs that they're not even using for their own products and having to go to a competitor, which can't be a
and it's not just some money, like it's the most expensive thing you can really do in that industry.
It costs billions, like the ASML machines. Is that the right? I hope I got that right. I think the ASML machines that make the chips are like, those machines alone cost like billions and billions of dollars just for the machine, let alone the warehouse space to put them, all the processes. It's extremely expensive. And so for Intel to succeed, they need to get back to having fab technology they want to use, which supposedly they say they're getting back towards. We'll see how that goes. And that's going to underpin a lot of the other successes. But that sort of thing is crucial. We need multiple CPU players. Any industry with a monopoly is not a good industry. It just sucks. It's no good. You want competition. So Intel needs to become successful. That's just the way it is.
What are your hopes about SteamOS for desktop? Crystal ball. Do you think it will be a thing in the next 5 years? Windows not getting any better? True. So I hope Valve is putting resources into it. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I hope so. I think we've talked in the past about how, Windows just keeps getting worse. Just bloated, crappy features, focusing on all the wrong things instead of trying to make the user experience better. So I don't really want to rehash all of that. SteamOS being this sort of lighter gaming-focused OS that they already use for the Steam Deck, which is a great device, great OS on there, works really well. Obviously, you can see a path where that would be attractive to gamers, especially if it was offering things like superior performance or ease of use or something. There's going to be problems where people, use their PC for mixed things like desktop apps as well as gaming. But I think we're probably in a position where people are more primed than they ever have been to leave Windows. Like,
I think even dual booting people would be more than willing to do.
Yeah. So I think, 20 years ago, if you were saying, hey, everyone moved to this dedicated gaming OS from Steam, people would be like, what? Absolutely not. Today, people are like, Windows is garbage. Like, I'm more than happy to try out SteamOS or something. I think they're currently in a position where they seem to be testing SteamOS on other handheld devices, especially ones that are made using AMD silicon, because I think a lot of SteamOS is built largely for the Steam Deck itself, which uses an AMD APU. So they're kind of experimenting a bit with that. It'll need much broader compatibility to work on a desktop platform, but we're talking 5 years. Who knows what could happen in 5 years? And I certainly think if the gaming community got on board, that it would be successful, especially coming from a brand like Steam. Steam has a lot of brand power. Like, people like Steam. If you're talking about like the Epic Games OS, I think people would be like, there's no way I'm using that. But because people actually like Steam, they've got a chance. Hopefully Windows pulls their finger out and starts making a better gaming sort of platform. But they're too focused on AI. So enjoy your Copilot Plus gaming PCs, guys. It's going to be lots of fun. If I must, and I mean must, buy a sub $250 US graphics card, which one would you recommend?
Well, if you're talking about current new generation GPUs, the only one reliably available at that price is the RTX 5050. So
And that's actually available at $250.
Check.
Probably is. I just trust you.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I haven't really been following and tracking the progress of the RTX 5050 since my review. When I reviewed it, it was.
Yeah.
I don't imagine the demand has been too crazy, so I'm just going to go out there and say it's probably $250 US. So let that depressing reality just sink in for a moment.
Yep.
Occasionally, I have seen 9060 XT 8GB cards go down to like 250, 260. If that's the case, absolutely get that because that's a significantly better product than the 5050. So
yep.
That would be my recommendation, but whether or not you can get one, hard to say on that one. But yeah, I don't really have a recommendation. I just have the reality for you, and that is that there's only one card that is reliably at that price, which is the 5050.
Yeah, the Intel Arc B580 should be competing there, but it's not.
Nope, definitely not. There'll should be no availability at that price for the B580. My other recommendation would be to look at the secondhand market. I think over at like eBay.com, so the US version of eBay, you can buy like an RTX 3060 for around $160 US. Like
an RTX 3060 for that price.
Yeah,
that's not bad.
They generally sell for under $200 US, and they're a little bit faster than an RTX 5050, and you have more VRAM. So, I mean, it's very similar performance. So maybe a secondhand GPU would be the option. Of course, there's a whole heap of secondhand things you have to worry about there, but eBay is generally pretty safe to buy from. So,
and I'm sure you can buy like RX 6600s and those things like run out models, but
they're very slow now though. They're much slower than a 5050 from memory.
That's the problem. They're slow, and then the feature support's pretty mediocre. Like the RTX 3060 used with DLSS support, 12 gig of VRAM, reasonable performance seems to be the way that I'd be leaning there based on the options you've just said.
Yep.
But we're not talking great. Like none of those options, like that's the obvious great choice. It's like you have to settle for this or settle for that.
It depends how cheap they are, like how, what price can you reliably get them at.
Yeah.
But the secondhand market becomes a whole different thing because there's many more graphics cards that are available on the secondhand market, though to varying degrees. We have done like the ultimate used GPU guides before, which take an extreme amount of work because you've got to work at like, in the last 3 months, how many of these have sold? So how likely are you to find one? What's the typical price been? And then how do they perform today and compare to other cards? So I've spent like a couple of months once or twice making that content. I'm not super excited to do it again, but maybe if things calm down, but I've heard towards the end of the year I'm going to be pretty flat out, so it seems unlikely.
Why is the 9070 XT still priced above MSRP 5 months after its release?
Well, in a word, demand.
Yeah, it's a supply and demand issue, isn't it? The demand of the card, I think, is higher than AMD anticipated. They made a certain quantity, and that quantity wasn't enough. So that's a very, very simple answer, supply and demand. I think if you sort of go a few levels beyond that, I don't think AMD really wanted to sell the card at $600 US. I think that was...
Well, we know they didn't.
Well, yeah, we know that the price ahead of launch was definitely not $600. It was either $650 or $700, and they changed it at the last minute to $600. There's all that thing of the stockpiling of GPUs in warehouses, retailers for months before launch. The retailers were expecting the cards to be more like $700 US or equivalent in whatever region they were stockpiling. And so there was all that flow-on effect of only some models got discounted at launch. The other models were more expensive. And then as time has gone on, a lot of these AIBs have prioritized their premium models because the demand has been high enough that they don't need to make the MSRP cards. So which of the brands has discontinued the sort of their entry-level models at this point?
Yeah, well, it's not official. So, for example, the Reaper, that's no longer in production apparently. It's not officially discontinued, so they may, I suppose...
They may bring it back.
They haven't said that to me. It's just at this point in time, they didn't have samples and they didn't have product because it's been discontinued and they're not interested in promoting it. I think the same applies to the ASRock Challenger, though I haven't had direct confirmation from ASRock there, but just, again, it's another MSRP card that just doesn't exist at the moment, and I imagine it's probably a similar thing to Power Color. And speaking with a few different brands, why there's either a very limited supply of the MSRP card or it's been discontinued altogether. It's just because they've been blown away by the overwhelming demand for products like the 9070, 9070 XT, and they make more money selling their premium cards, and people are buying them because the demand's so high. And the demand's so high for those parts because competing parts like a 5070 Ti, last I looked, that was back up to $900 US, which is absurd. So if you can get the Radeon GPU for around $700, $750, that's a reasonable discount. I'm not necessarily saying you should buy one over the other or whatever. I'm just saying that's what people are doing. And it's made that part really popular. So that's what they're buying. And when we sat down and spoke with a few different people at Computex, they basically said the community, they credited the community with saving AMD from AMD. So this is like AMD's partners, which is really interesting. But they confirmed to us that AMD was absolutely going to charge more for the 9070 and 9070 XT, and they made a last minute pricing change, which they think is what saved the Radeon brand essentially and made all these products exciting. Because the partners were, especially the exclusive partners, they were pretty blown away by how much demand there was. I guess because previous generations weren't that popular, and then just out of nowhere, they've had a lot of success with this one. They really can't make enough of them. They can't get enough supply from AMD. So that's really why the pricing has remained high. And then the competition is even higher. So
yeah, I think you would see a lot more $600 US models if the 5070 Ti was widely available for $750. Because it doesn't really make sense to buy a 9070 XT for $700 when you could buy a 5070 Ti for just $50 more. I think most people would just buy the GeForce card. And there is a lot of regional variance, as we've seen in some regions. The 5070 Ti is closer to the MSRP. But even in Australia, like, it comes in and out of its MSRP price. So there can be a month where we'd have a look and you could buy it for, I think it's $1,509 is the local RRP, regular retail price in Australia.
What's the 9070 XT's $1,200 or $1,100?
It should be lower than that, I think.
Yeah, it might be
$1,100. And so 1 month, the 5070 Ti, you might get one for $1,509 or even a little lower. Another month, you'll check back and it's $100 Australian more. And so there's less incentive for the 9070 XT to be priced at its local MSRP. And so it isn't. I think over time, though, we are seeing prices improve. So it's not really a case where it's been $700 for a long time. It seems like slowly a little bit is being chipped away, especially if you are looking over a period of, say, a month. Like, let's say you're checking a retailer every day over a month. I think these days you're more likely to see the occasional restock of models that are not necessarily at the MSRP, but are closer to it. And so that makes it a lot more attractive. But then the models that are in stock for a longer period of time, like if you only check once, then you may see a model that's quite expensive. And then again, even with some of those MSRP cards have been ended production, you may see the next model up still get discounted down to a level where it's much closer to the MSRP, much more reasonable. Like you would expect a mid-tier sort of GPU in a lineup from PowerColor or whatever to only be like, $20, $30, maybe $50 more. And that has happened at times. But, obviously the normal price of those cards can be $100 more, making them a lot less attractive. So, yeah, certainly if you're interested in 9070 XT, we're hearing that production should improve towards the end of this year. I'm not sure whether that will happen. That's just the rumblings in the AIB world. And also, I would just recommend checking over a long period of time. Like, check back at your local retailer every day for a couple of weeks, see whether there's a restock at like an opportune moment where the cards are available at a lower price. And that's a good time to buy. Yeah, if you're forced to spend $700 or $750 in the US, it's kind of is what it is over there, unfortunately. But yeah, in a lot of other regions, it's not as bad. So, all right, we'll hit pause on the questions for now. Looks like there's still a couple of things that we want to talk about. So we'll make a part 3 up on the channel probably later this week, which might slip us out of July and into August, but we'll still call it July series, whatever. So yeah, hopefully everyone's enjoyed this episode. And if you do, and you want to sign up and support Hardware Unboxed, we've got Patreon and the join button. Links below. Check out all that stuff. If you sign up, you get access to things like our Discord community. Great place to chat about stuff, all the latest news and get advice, questions in there. And in there, we've got the Q&A channel. You get priority access to this sort of series. You've also got monthly live streams, BTS content, lots of good stuff over there. So it's always worth signing up. Anyway, that'll do it for this one. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve.
See you in the next one.